listening to the Listenup Show, Startup Entrepreneur Podcast. I'm Mitchell Chadrow, your host. On today's show, we're speaking with Steve Bazemore. Why don't we just have Steve tell us a little bit about his personal story today on show 030. Listen up, trusted friends. It's your business, it's your family, it's your life. Now let's get started. Steve, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks, Mitchell. I appreciate you having me on today.
I'm really excited to have you. Can you take us through a little bit about your personal story?
Yeah, I'll definitely do that. If you back up, what you see now is kind of the blog and the things I talk about, but, how I got there, if you rewind about 6 years ago, picture me at 30 years old, pretty successful, by, most folks' terms, chemical engineering degree, got an MBA, married, 2 kids, good job, nice house, all the things that you would think that kind of define success. And then, started having a lot of stomach issues and things like that along the way. I won't belabor the point necessarily, but, I went from about 160-something pounds down to about 127 pounds. And thankfully, my wife kind of forced the issue with our doctors and said, look, you guys have to figure out what's going on here. So went in for a colonoscopy. Next thing you know, I'm, waking up in a hospital getting another scan and different things. And fast forward over that weekend, that next Monday, I'm actually in for surgery where they removed essentially a softball-sized tumor from my stomach. You talk about kind of a wake-up call and what kind of wake-up call that probably should have been. You start to reflect on where you've been and what you've done and that sort of thing. And you start to really get a little harsh with yourself on kind of, have you really done the things that you wanted to do? Have you left the legacy you wanted to leave? When your kids get older, and when you're gone as a parent, will they remember the things you tried to teach them, and will they have those kind of things to hold on to?
When I started reading your story, the reason why I actually started the podcast, not just about business, it's all about business, family, and life. Say about leaving a legacy. Can't have one to neglect the other two, so it's really important to have that balance. Tell us a little bit about what was going through your mind at that time, because like you said, maybe you started to have to reprioritize or, rethink things through in terms of where you were up until that point.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because I started going in for treatments and things like that. And, it was called Hyper-CVAD was the treatment I had. And, long story short, that's 1 week in the hospital, 1 week out of the hospital, 1 week on essentially home confinement. And during that time period, the time you get to spend with, loved ones, your family is very compressed, right? They're not in the hospital with you every minute. When you're at home, they're not always at home. They've got things they're doing. They're living their lives and things. So it really makes you get very much attuned to every little moment to say, am I really getting what I want to out of this moment? It's interesting because as I looked back, in my previous 30 years before that had all happened, I was saying no more times than I feel like would be good, right? I wasn't necessarily getting what I wanted to get out of every moment. Small things like, I remember pretty vaguely after we got out of treatment, we decided to go down to Disney World to kind of celebrate the event. And I remember sitting in a chair at a show and, they asked for volunteers and, the old me would have essentially said, you know what, I'll just sit here, I'll kind of watch, I'll play along.
Right.
But what's that really doing? So, just that small difference in perspective causes you to volunteer for something like that. And, that's a memory that, that was, 4 or 5 years ago. And that's something my kids can point back to this day. And they actually remember that. So it's, it just tells you about the power of small moments. And I think going through, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that in their own kind of stories if they've been through any kind of illness or something like that in the family. They can connect to that where you say, look, I can get a lot out of each moment if I just pay attention.
Please sign up to my email list for the latest special offers exclusive for our Listen Up Show Startup Entrepreneur Podcast audience at mitchellchadrow.com/sign up. I have been providing business advice, resources, and help to entrepreneurs for over 20 years, and I'm looking forward to helping all of you. Sign up for my email list, again, at mitchellchadrow.com/sign up. I will provide you with full transcripts for each interview, my ebook, 30 Tools to Start Up, the Startup Checklist, and many other education and training materials, all back at mitchellchadrow.com/signup. Are you incorporated, Steve? Do you have I know that you're doing this now on the side. You're currently working for the bank, and you're doing the coaching as a side hustle, but are you incorporated at this point?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that should be a quick answer, but it's actually a little bit longer answer, and maybe there's a little bit of lesson to learn in that. I'm actually incorporated under the name Bizlytic Consulting.
Okay.
And what's interesting about that is, when I, so kind of post-treatment, all that sort of thing where, I'm like, am I getting what I want to get out of this? Wasn't necessarily that happy in the day job that I had at that point in time. So I started to make some shifts, shifted over to the bank into a role that I actually really like. Then I started thinking about, well, how can I impact more people, right?
Sure.
I impact everybody in the organization I work in, but how do I go a little bit bigger than that, a little bit broader than that? So I started thinking about, well, hey, let's go consult with other companies that are really trying to build positive cultures, cultures of true employee engagement. And I quickly found that, companies aren't necessarily buying that. So it was an interesting, learning along the way. It caused me to really think about, well, they're not buying because, they're not interested in that service, or is that really not where my true passion lies? And it was interesting because I think as you iterate on that and you get closer and closer to the thing that really kind of drives your internal engine, you can start to pick up on things and you start to pick up momentum. And jumping into that space of consulting with other businesses, did a couple of projects and they were cool and everything, but really what I was able to see was what I really enjoyed when I got in those companies was those one-on-one conversations with leaders that really were one-on-one coaching conversations, and typically kind of evolved into more of a, personal development coaching for them on how to lead their organization and things like that, versus programs they could put in place as a business. So, that really caused me to pivot a little bit into what you see today out there on stevebazemore.com, where, I'll blog a lot just to kind of get the message out there. And I think that's a great way to reach people, but pivoted really into also coaching individuals in their own development, kind of taking charge of what they're trying to achieve.
And that's interesting in terms of what you learned and how you pivoted, because you really preferred one-on-one. The show has 3 main sponsors. HostGator will sponsor our startup round. I use HostGator to host all of my websites, so check out the special offer exclusive to my podcast audience and get 25% off your web hosting package today at mitchellchadrow.com/HostGator. Audible, an Amazon company, sponsors our Fast Pitch, my book club recommendations, back at mitchellchadrow.com/audible. Snappa sponsors our wrap-up round. For all my graphic design needs, I was so impressed with this company that I actually interviewed the founder, Christopher Gimmer, on our show 28, back at mitchellchadrow.com/show028. But to start your Snappa design graphic today, go on over to mitchellchadrow.com/Snappa. When I go to your website, I see that you've created this thing, 36 days to an extraordinary life, and I think that you really did a wonderful job with that. I actually took a look at that in great detail, and I think it's going to resonate very well with other people when they take a look at it. Can you walk us through a little bit about that, and what were your motivations to basically create this how-to guide for individuals who are working on their own transformation?
Yeah. No, that's a really important point, because, if I look back, it took me really years to start, I feel like, actually starting to look at life the right way, in terms of how I approach it, how I prioritize, and that sort of thing. So what I wanted to do was, what I started to learn via trial and error through my own kind of challenges and things like that, I wanted to put it down on paper and make sure folks understood that really, when you get right down to it, the steps of, building transformation into your own life really aren't that complicated. So that's the reason for me kind of documenting it in this way. And, if you look at, 36 days, the only thing magic about 36 days is that, there's the old statistic about, it takes about 6 weeks for something to actually become habit. And I think that's really what you're trying to do when you try to build an extraordinary life, is to really build habits into your life that drive the kind of outcomes that you want, the things that you envision in your life and what you're trying to drive in terms of your own legacy. So I really wanted to document that kind of in plain speak, all the things I've learned along the way.
And was it what happened to you in 2012 that really was that wake-up call, so to speak, literally and figuratively, that you started, that things started to sort of maybe come into focus a little bit clearer, that you needed to sort of, transform and sort of put some of these things more in focus, create some type of an order and a priority?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if I look at life back then, I was kind of measuring success based on the typical sort of metrics. Do I make good money? Do I have a good roof over my head? Do I have a nice family? All those sorts of things. Those things are great. But if you really challenge yourself and start to ask some of the hard questions about the legacy you're leaving, what's really your what would the bigger version of yourself really look like? You start to see that there's some gaps, and it's like, the 36 days process really starts with day 0, which is simply choose. And you won't see a lot of words written about that, but that is maybe one of the most important steps, is that you've got to choose to do something different. And for me, 2012 was kind of that time period of where I chose that, I'm going to do things a little bit differently as I move forward.
Now, what happened to you in terms of your personal story in 2012, you hope that most people that are out there are listening, that they don't need to sort of go through something as drastic as that to sort of, provide a wake-up call to them. And so one of my inspirations and motivations in obviously doing the podcast is to let people know that they can achieve and do more than they might think. And unfortunately, through fear or through other things that are motivating them not to sort of go out, start something up on the side, or to try something new, and as simple as volunteering at Disney, for example, like you did, which you normally would not have done before, but because of your experience with your own illness, it kind of made you sort of jump out of your comfort zone and do something that you normally wouldn't necessarily do. So what do you tell somebody out there who's either extremely comfortable in a career that might be soulless, or they might not be getting everything that they want out of it, or they're making very good money and they don't want to rock the boat, but yet they've always had these passions on the side, and for one reason or another, which I've mentioned a few, haven't decided to do something on the side? I mean, obviously you're now coaching. What do you say to them?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in a way, I'm a bit thankful for having a wake-up call, because I think, sometimes it does take, a substantial, marker in life to actually cause you to change course. But honestly, I think, for folks to really take that next step, I think it's pretty simple to start thinking about, like, you're not here forever, right?
Sure.
The process, that I lay out really starts with establishing certain success habits. And when you dive into that, you'll see things like personal challenge assignments and things about how, as you go through this process and you start to build your vision, we're going to be deliberate and design some experiments, if you will, to challenge you to go outside your norm and get you more comfortable with that. And as you really, I encourage people to really spend a lot of time assessing themselves through, they can use assessments, things like the Myers-Briggs or different things to really assess themselves and get down to the core of who they are and what motivates them. Because I think the closer you get to that, and the closer you get to that reality of, how far away are you from that core drive and that core passion, that becomes a bit of an internal motivator to get people to go beyond and actually force action.
Sure.
And then if you can kind of challenge yourself through some accountability, coaches help in that space. I think that's one of the biggest places where coaches help, is helping hold you accountable to kind of making that progress, challenging yourself and whatnot. But I think you can do it on your own, but you've got to really have a great understanding of who you are and how far away you are from I guess, your internal, core passions.
When you first reached out to me and I looked up your background and I saw that you were working during the day full time, one of the things that resonated with me is that not only are you working for a bank that has bank powers, but is also traditionally a credit card bank, and that's kind of my area as well. What do you say to someone who wants to start something up on the side, and although it doesn't affect what they're doing during the day, they have an employer who may or may not necessarily either approve of that? So, I mean, it sounds as if, your employer knows about this, and so how do you sort of broach that subject in a mature way with an employer to basically let them know that, hey, you're providing 40 plus hours for them, but you also happen to have something on the side? Talk to those people out there about that, because I know that that's a big concern of theirs as well.
Yeah, and Mitchell, that's a good point, because I think folks are a lot of times afraid to bring up that conversation. But to be honest with you, I think it's all about delivery. I mean, if you are in a role, I'm lucky. I actually have a day job that I actually enjoy. And like, so, I'd really prefer that relationship stay nice and healthy, because I think it gives me a lot of opportunities to do things I like to do. But really understanding that, look, that day job, if it's providing benefits and salary and different things, you've got to deliver. And that, as you think about your own priorities, for me, priorities, my family is first, work is second. But if you really drive in and look at work, there are times where you're going to have to, and actually a lot of times where you're going to have to prioritize that day job over your side hustle in a given moment. So, while you're at work, putting in, 100% effort, I think is critical to, letting people know that you're in it for the right reasons, you have the right intent, and you're really just trying to build something positive in the world, whether that be at your day job or at your side hustle.
So what was that conversation like with the people that you work with? I mean, obviously they may or may not necessarily be familiar with what you're doing on the side, which it sounds as if doesn't obviously affect what you're doing during the day with them. How did you broach that subject with them? And I think that would be most helpful for other people who obviously either haven't been able to sort of broach that subject or don't know how to approach it.
Yeah, I think that, as with a lot of things, honesty is the best policy, and really being honest about, what you're trying to get out of your role in your day job, but then also sharing like, hey, this is why I'm approaching this side hustle. For me, it gives me a chance to reach out to more people. It gives me a chance to, do different things, impact the world in a bigger, better way. So, telling that story, I don't shy away from telling that story, because I think that, ultimately, when you're talking to your employer, you're talking to another person, and I think they'll get it and they'll see where your passion is there as well. But at the same time, when you're having that conversation, you've got to express that, hopefully same level of passion in what you're doing in your day job. For me, I'm lucky because, like I said, I enjoy that. So it's not a hard thing to do, and I can be pretty authentic about it. But honestly, we don't actually have to have the conversation about my side hustle that much, right? Sure. Once folks became aware of it, and I kind of laid it out and said, hey, here's how I look at this. Here's, why I'm doing this thing on the side that, I do hope grows and continues to kind of build over time. This is why I'm doing it. And here's how that relates to the work I'm doing here. And, evidence, in your actions is probably the best policy after that, to really just make sure you deliver at work the entire time you're there. I think that's probably the safest way to do it.
Sure. So given that, and that's great advice for those people out there. So what do you think are some of the most common mistakes then that other career-minded people who are in a career but maybe trying to start up on the side, what is either delaying them or preventing them from having that balance, which can be defined as success?
Yeah, I think if you think about the conversation, and I've seen folks do this where they've got a venture on the side, whether it be a nonprofit or a business or something like that obviously brings them, quite a bit of satisfaction. It's something that they really connect with. I can visibly see that about their side hustle, but then kind of in the day-to-day, they won't put in 100%, right? And when it comes down to, prioritizing their time during the workday, they might choose something that is related to their side hustle over really their day job. And I think that honestly is the biggest mistake, because I think people limit themselves in terms of thinking about how much time do they have available in a given day, right? Say you're at your day job for 8 hours. You need to be working on that day job and putting in the max effort that you can for that 8 hours. But you still got a lot of hours after that where you can focus on family, your side hustle, and things like that. So I think being reasonable about how much time you have, laying it out, and then getting a daily practice of actually being where you are in that moment. So when you're at work, you're at work. And when you're working on your side hustle, you're working on your side hustle. And for me, I go as far as to partition the day a little bit, and to actually, dedicate time in the evenings, when the kids are gone to sleep, or, maybe there's some event where I know folks are going to be out of the house and I can focus on, writing for the blog or that sort of thing. But I'll actually dedicate that time. So I know that, look, this is when I focus on my side hustle, so that, when I show up at work the next morning, there's not this pressure of, oh my gosh, I need to get this thing done for my coaching business. I've already set aside that time, so I can actually, 8 a.m. the next morning, I'm ready to go to kind of do my day job and put in the effort there.
You talked about wanting to do coaching one-on-one, and we really haven't defined coaching, because there's life coaches, there's career coaches where they obviously provide career advice. There's that type of advice, which we've kind of been talking generally about, where people are transitioning, or they're basically having a career in during the day, and their side hustle, as you refer to it, in the evening or on the weekends, that doesn't affect their main job. So tell us a little bit about, how you come to your one-on-one coaching clients and what type of career advice, you're providing. I think that would be most helpful to the audience.
Yeah, I think as a coach, to be honest with you, no matter what kind of coach you are, your number one role is really to be there to ask the client the hard questions that they won't ask themselves, and to really, get real about things. If you think about your own situation and where you are in your own life, there's probably some things that maybe you want to do differently. But sometimes you're not willing, and that in the back of your mind, but you're not going to ask yourself out loud and actually commit to an action plan. So that's the value a coach can play, first and foremost, is to ask those hard questions and then actually partner with you to build, a real action plan to actually make progress against that, to really achieve what it is you envision. So, I don't know that I don't enjoy the term life coach necessarily. I like to think about it as personal development, because, it's really about making yourself better and driving that kind of contribution out into the world. So I think, bringing that perspective to clients and really asking those hard questions, and then really, you can help them with, as you look at kind of the process I typically use, we'll do different assessments, whether it's you think you've got a bigger role you can play to contribute to the world, which might lead you down to a path of really more career development. There's assessments we can actually put in front of you to actually, again, highlight and ask some of those hard questions, so that we can build an action plan around it that will get you where you want to go.
From a business perspective, how are you generating your clients? Is it more local? Is it more blogging, more word of mouth? Is it how are you sort of generating your business and sort of getting the word out?
Yeah, for me, a lot, because, I still have the day job, doing this bit as a side hustle. It's really word of mouth at this point in time. I've got a limited number of clients I can take at any one time to make sure that balance works out between, work and family and the day job and that sort of thing. So I leverage word of mouth, because I think, hearing from client, that, hey, this person really helped me out. Steve was really able to help me out with an action plan, and here's what I've done going from here to here. Honestly, that's the best form of advertising there could possibly be. So that's kind of where I focus today, is really word of mouth, and focus on doing a great job with with each and every conversation I have with a client.
One of the differences between just having knowledge and having wisdom is, wisdom is not having to go through a challenge like you might have had to have gone through in 2012 to sort of realize that you can refocus and rebalance things. And so one of the things that I like to try to create, through the guests that I bring on and the questions that I ask for the listeners is to basically help them with that wisdom. Now, you know as well as I do that sometimes in life you have to go through those experiences in order to have that wisdom, but sometimes you can sort of learn wisdom through other people's experiences. So, can you talk to the people out there who maybe are in a company where they really do have that passion, but, again, for whatever reason, they're not able to sort of pull that trigger. Can you talk to them about some of the essential understandings, some of the proper mindsets that they need to sort of deal with to basically, come face to face with those daily challenges? Because it sounds as if you're limited in terms of the number of face-to-face one-on-one clients that you have, not because you don't want to have more, it's just because, you have to be able to be good at balancing your full-time day job. And so how do you get that proper mindset? It's a challenge, I'm sure.
Oh, it certainly is. I think I've got, pages and pages of things that I plan to do at some point in time, but you've really got to be disciplined and realistic with, the amount of time that you have and how you spend that time. For me, I mentioned, family being number one, and as a result, today's the day after Thanksgiving, and, this call is probably the only work I'll be doing today. The rest of it will be focused on spending time with family. And there are times during that where it's like, hey, I could be, man, I just had an idea for a blog. I should go write that. Or, man, if I were to do that, you just get, you do get a little antsy. But I think you've got to bring yourself back to that moment and realize that, and be really thoughtful about your priorities and realize, set these priorities up for a reason, right? When I think about holistically the kind of life I'm trying to build, I talk about an extraordinary life, not an extraordinary career or an extraordinary relationship. I want it all to be great. And that's hard to do, right? And I think a lot of people want that. But the start of that process is really prioritization, understanding what's important to you. So when you think about your legacy, your vision, what are the things that you care about, right? For me, I mentioned family's number one. For somebody else, their business might be number one. And if it is, I hope they're spending a lot of extra time, building that out and focusing on building their vision in their business. For me, I'm okay to play the long game with my business because I know that my kids will only be young for so long, and I want to maximize the amount of time I have to influence them because ultimately they'll be a big part of the legacy I leave. And after that, hey, maybe we'll have a chance to reprioritize. But I think being really, honestly, harsh with yourself about your priorities, I think can straighten you out a little bit sometimes. So when you get antsy and you think, hey, I should be focusing on this other thing, bring yourself back to those priorities and realize, why are you spending the time where you're spending it?
Yep. And Steve, that's another reason why I was really glad to have you on, and I resonated so much with your writing. And that is because my philosophy about business, family, and life is very, very close to that. And one of the things that I try to sort of get across to my audience in terms of how important that really is. And I think that you're somebody who basically is espousing that type of philosophy, and we're really thankful for that. The Fast Pitch Round will be sponsored by Audible, and we learn more about our guests' favorite books and my favorites back at my book club. Go over to mitchellchadrow.com/audible. In the Fast Pitch Round, I cover many fun questions to help us learn more about our guests, their favorite books, their quotes, heroes, their favorite apps, the resources that they recommend for under $100, what contributes most to their success, and some bad advice that's actually being given to entrepreneurs. The reason why I chose Audible to sponsor my Fast Pitch Round, that's easy. I love books, and Audible is owned by a powerful company, Amazon, that stands behind all their products. Audible was willing to offer an exclusive free 30-day trial to my podcast listeners with one free audiobook download. If any listener doesn't like their book, Audible will exchange it for you, and you can cancel at any time. Audible allows you to keep your free download, and you can choose from over 180,000 bestsellers, new releases, classics, and more. I recommend The Last Lecture by Randy Posh. So dream big, get inspired, and listen up. Go on over to mitchellchadrow.com/audible. You know, in this next round, we call it our lightning round, Steve. And the reason being is that we just want to ask some fast questions, get some quick answers. And the reason for it is that, again, not only because it's about business, but it's also about family and life. And it allows the audience to sort of get a different perspective on who you are as a person, because I think that's important for other people to see different dynamics of the individual that come on here. So it's actually sponsored by Audible. You're familiar with Audible, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so, I mean, I've been reading books forever. I mean, I love books. I mean, every day, you know, I'm reading books. They inspire, they motivate. And actually, Audible has about 180,000 titles. So, you know, I'm sure you have a favorite book, which I'll ask you in a second, but the lightning round is actually sponsored by mitchellchadrow.com/audible. So you could actually go on over, start your free 30-day trial, and you actually get one free download with your first free 30 days that you're with Audible. So what can you recommend a book for the audience, something that they can go over that's really resonated with you in business and family and life?
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably heard about this one, but it's by Greg McDowell, Essentialism.
Okay, yes, I have. I haven't read it, but I will after this interview.
Yeah, you definitely have to read it. I think, you know, when I talk about getting straight on your priorities and where you're spending your time, it's a really good read to kind of refocus you on, you know, what are those things that you find are actually essential in your life? You know, and it'll give you a chance to really question, you know, the things you thought were essential, you know, are they really? So I think it's a really kind of thought-provoking read. So I definitely would recommend that to you and the audience.
Sure. No, that's wonderful. So what is your secret ingredient to success?
Oof. Let's see. You know, honestly, I would have to say it's patience.
Okay.
That's probably the first thing that popped in my head. And I mentioned, you know, playing the long game in business, but I think it plays out even in the day-to-day of how I coach people. You know, a good coach is patient in the conversation and really lets the client drive towards their own outcomes and only interjects when really needed, right? It's a personal journey for the client, and the coach isn't necessarily supposed to be there to spell it out for them, but I think having patience in how that process works out is critical.
Probably, Steve, the reason why the show is called Listen Up, because as much as it is for the audience, you know, I do a lot of talking, and so, you know, it comes down to sometimes you need to talk, but sometimes you need to listen and sort of be patient with yourself. So I think that's why my grandmother said patience is a virtue. So that's wonderful. Your best business practice that you use maybe every day, something that helps you, you know, again, in business, family, and life.
Yeah, I mean, every day I keep 2 journals. And not a lot of people know this, but I keep one that's kind of more focused on, you know, what went well the previous day, what didn't, you know, what am I thankful for, you know, write a few sentences in there. One's really focused on that to help me reflect. And the other is basically my journal of, like, here's the essential things I have to get done today. You know, and every day you'll see something in there about writing, because I do feel like, you know, blogging is a great way to reach people. But I'll definitely journal in there, you know, what are the major things I need to get done, you know, for my business in a given day. And that helps me keep focused on, you know, if I can't spend time to get 10 things done, I can call the day successful as long as I get this one thing done.
How about the best business advice that you put right up there on a billboard for everybody to see?
Yeah, you know what? It's that's a good one. And I think, to be honest with you, I think it's that old Zig Ziglar quote that goes something like, you know, if you can get anything in life you want as long as you help enough other people get what they want. And I probably didn't get that 100% right, but I honestly think not only is that great life advice, but I do think that's really the best business advice because, I talked about, the value of word of mouth being kind of probably the best route to go in business. But, that's really what it is. To help, as long as you serve other people, I think you can really, in the long game, get the value out that you're looking for.
How about an app that you use to help you either in business, family, or life, something that kind of stands out?
An app. Honestly, I don't know if this is really an app, but I do listen to podcasts pretty religiously. Kind of on my commute to work, when I'm working out, when I go to take a run, I've always got a podcast or two going because I honestly think that's if you're busy and you really, but still have the desire to learn and kind of expand your own horizons, I actually think podcasts are one of the best ways to do that because you get to hear from great people that you wouldn't normally get to talk to every day.
How about a fun fact about you that maybe not a lot of people know, but if they found out, it would give them a different perspective about Steve?
I would say every year I try to teach myself a new skill. So last year was I taught myself to wakeboard, which was interesting. I don't advise that if you're over 35. That was can make you pretty sore. This year it was teaching myself guitar. Still working on that.
Okay.
In 2017, we'll see what we'll see what it is. I've got a short list, but we'll see what we pick for next year.
The reason why I like this next question is that I always tell the audience, especially when they're starting up, that you don't need to spend a lot to get a lot. Not always, but a lot of the times. So can you tell us purchase for under $100 that has impacted your life the most?
$100. I mean, honestly, let's see, under $100. This is why I like starting up Lean. To be honest with you, I haven't had to spend a lot of money starting up my business, but I think if I had to go with something, I'd probably have to go with my headset that I use every day. Helps me, take calls, lots of different things, and helps just with productivity. But that's probably a really basic one.
Yeah, no, sure. And what one thing contributes most to your success?
What one thing? Let's see. I would have to say family actually comes to mind, first. And I think in my head, that's really what, all of this is about. My side hustle and everything, it's really about leaving a lasting impression. And that starts with family. So, whenever you're having a hard time, figuring out what to do next or, trying to get through a certain hurdle or, if you're trying to make transformation on your own, you're trying to think about, why should I do this? Why should I put in all this hard work? At least for me, I come back to family, my kids, and I say that is enough of a reason to keep driving and keep moving forward.
And our last question in this round, Steve, is that when you think of the word successful, what first name comes to your mind?
I would actually have to say my grandfather. His name's Eugene Corrigan. He passed away a few years ago, but he was, successful in most terms, nothing, he wasn't rich or anything, but what he had was a certain, happiness day to day. And he was really out to serve other people, whether that be his family, his community, the people he worked with. And you could see it, every day in the people he interacted with, how much of an impact he had on them. And serving them. So honestly, I think of that as success because he was able to kind of leave that impression with folks in every interaction he had.
Have you ever heard the company Snappa, S-N-A-P-P-A? Have you ever heard of Snappa?
I have.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, well, that's super. Because, when I take a look at your blog, when I go to your website, some of the graphics there are just so beautiful. They're so nice. And one of the wonderful things about Snappa is that it actually saves someone who's really a non-graphic designer a lot of time by allowing you don't have to use Photoshop, so they provide all the beautiful graphic for all of the social media ads that you want to do for for all your blogs, if you're creating a newsletter, or even if you're creating, like a family or a holiday event and you want to sort of have an invitation, Snappa is actually just perfect for that. So actually, it's actually one of the top 30 resources and tools. And actually, last 2 shows ago, we actually had on Christopher Gimmer, who's actually the co-founder of Snappa. And so now if people go to mitchellchadrow.com/Snappa, that's SNAPPA, they could actually sign up for free. There's also other paid plans that you can obviously get. It's easy, it's simple, and they actually have pre-made templates. So all you have to do is just use their high-tech photos that they provide. And again, I actually have recommended it on my ebook. So if people go over to mitchellchadrow.com and they actually sign up for my email list, they'll actually get the ebook, and one of the tools and resources that I do recommend is actually Snappa. And if you like this interview, can you please give us a rating in iTunes? It actually takes 2 minutes for a good written review. You head on over to mitchellchadrow.com/iTunes. It will actually automatically take you there, and you can throw in a rating. It's really going to help us out, and it'll help other people discover the podcast. Join my mailing list at mitchellchadrow.com. You'll get the free ebook, 30 Tools to Start Up, and you'll actually get that Startup Entrepreneur outline that I just discussed on my last show. Steve, I've thoroughly enjoyed this. You're very inspirational, you're very motivational, and I do believe that there's going to be a lot of people that are going to get a tremendous amount out of listening up to this show. How can people stay in contact with you?
Yeah, the best way is, check out the website, stevebazemore.com. If you go on there, there's links out to all the different socials. LinkedIn, Twitter are the ones I use most frequently. So check me out there and kind of start the conversation.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I'm actually going to have a link directly to Steve's website and all the show notes from today so that you can check out Steve's 36 Days for an Extraordinary Life. And again, he does personal development coaching as his side hustle, and I think you really will enjoy reading his articles and his blog right there on his website. Steve, can you wrap up for us just top 3 things that people can sort of come away from this interview with, if you could? So number 1.
Yeah, I think that it's important for everybody to remember that every human being on this earth deserves to have an extraordinary life. If you have to think about that for a while, do that. But, we're lucky to live in, if you're listening to this in the U.S. or anywhere in the Western world, we're pretty lucky to live where we live and have the opportunities we have. So, but every human being really deserves that.
Number 2?
Number 2, I would have to say that the decision to make change is yours and yours alone. No one can do it for you. No one's going to put in the work for you. There are plenty of resources out there to help you build the kind of life that you want, but it's on you to take that first step and really choose to do something about it.
And Steve, number 3.
I would have to say happiness is in the journey. You can be happy today with what you have if you just change your perspective. And honestly, starting there is a great place, and I think it will lead you to immediate growth and really open up doors for you that you didn't even know were there.
Trusted friends, I hope you heard what Steve Bazemore had to say, because there were so many wisdom value bombs in what he's just said in these last 3 points, and I hope it resonates as much as it does with me. Again, till next time, we want to thank you, Steve, for coming on the show. We're so thankful, and until next time, take care. In closing, let me ask for my listeners' help. First, please subscribe to my email list at mitchellchadrow.com/signup. You will get all the full interview transcripts, my ebook, 30 Tools to Start Up, where I talk about these free resources in show 006. You'll get the startup checklist, education and training materials, and other resources just by signing up at mitchellchadrow.com/signup. Listen up, trusted friends. It's your business, it's your family, it's your life. Go out and live it. back at mitchellchadrow.com/sign-up. Help me boost the rankings of the Listen Up Show, the Startup Entrepreneur Podcast, by providing a well-written review in iTunes. mitchellchadrow.com/iTunes. It helps other people find the show. If you actually need instructions on how to do this, you can find that back at mitchellchadrow.com/sign-up. Thank you so much for subscribing to my email list and providing a written review on iTunes. Until next time.